year was 865, and the longships cut through the North Sea like blades through silk. But these weren't raiders returning with gold and glory. These were broken men, their shields shattered, their honors stripped away like flesh from bone. What awaited them wasn't celebration or even a warrior's death, but something far more terrifying. A fate so horrific that Viking warriors would literally throw themselves on enemy spears rather than face it, because in the brutal world of the Norse, there existed punishments that made death look like mercy. We think we understand the Vikings. Hollywood has given us bearded warriors who feared nothing, who sailed into battle singing songs of Valhalla. But the reality was infinitely more complex and considerably darker. The Viking Age wasn't just about conquest and courage. It was about a social system so rigid, so unforgiving, that failure didn't just mean losing your life. It meant losing your soul, your identity, everything that made you human in the eyes of your people. Today, we're diving deep into the shadow side of Norse society, where defeat carried consequences that would haunt generations. This isn't the sanitized version you've seen in movies. This is the unflinching reality of what happened when Viking honor was broken, when warriors fell from grace, and when entire bloodlines were cursed by the sins of their ancestors. The Norse concept of honor wasn't just important. It was literally everything. Your honor, your reputation, your standing in the community determined not just how you lived, but how you would be remembered after death. And in a culture that believed your reputation in life directly affected your treatment in the afterlife, social destruction was worse than physical death. The foundation of Viking society rested on something called frith, a complex web of obligations, loyalties, and mutual protection that bound communities together. When you broke frith, when you violated the sacred bonds that held society together, you weren't just punished, you were unmade as a person. The community would literally erase you from existence, treating you as if you had never been born. But before we explore these horrifying fates, we need to understand what Viking warriors were actually fighting for. It wasn't just land or treasure. It was their place in an eternal story. Every Norse warrior knew that their actions in life would determine their fate after death. Die gloriously in battle, and the Valkyries would carry you to Valhalla, where you'd feast and fight until Ragnarok. But die dishonorably, fail your oath, betray your lord or your kinsman, and your punishment would echo through eternity. The Vikings had a word for the worst kind of defeat: NID. This wasn't just losing a battle or failing a mission. This was a complete moral collapse that marked you as fundamentally unworthy of existing in civilized society. A person marked with NID became what the Norse called an utlager, an outlaw, but not in the way we understand the term today. This was far worse than being a criminal. This was being declared inhuman. Let me paint you a picture of what this actually meant. Imagine you're a Viking warrior, part of a raiding party that's sailed for weeks to reach the rich monasteries of England. Your Jarl has invested in this expedition, trusting you with weapons, provisions, and most importantly, his reputation. Your family's honor is tied to your success. Your children's future depends on you returning with glory intact. But something goes wrong. Maybe you panic in battle and abandon your shield brothers. Maybe you're captured and forced to reveal the location of your base camp. Maybe you simply fail to die when honor demands it. The specific crime almost doesn't matter. What matters is that you've broken the sacred bonds that define your existence as a Norse person. When you return home, if you're allowed to return at all, you find that you no longer exist. Not metaphorically, but literally in the eyes of your community. Your family cannot acknowledge you. Your wife cannot speak your name. Your children must pretend they have no father. Merchants cannot trade with you. Farmers cannot sell you food. You cannot enter sacred spaces or participate in religious ceremonies. You have become a walking ghost, visible but completely cut off from human society. This social death was so complete that it extended beyond the guilty party to their entire bloodline. Norse society believed that dishonor was hereditary. passed down through blood like a curse that could never be lifted. Your children would carry the stain of your failure. Their children would be marked by it. For generations, your descendants would struggle under the weight of your shame, fighting constantly to prove they were worthy of basic human recognition. The psychological torture of this existence was carefully designed to be worse than death. Vikings understood that humans are social creatures who need connection, recognition, and belonging to survive. By systematically destroying these connections, they created a punishment that attacked the very core of what made someone human. But social death was just the beginning. The Norse had developed an entire spectrum of fates worse than death, each calibrated to match specific types of failure or betrayal. Some of these punishments were physical, involving torture techniques that would make medieval inquisitors pale. Others were spiritual, designed to corrupt or destroy the victim's soul in ways that would affect their eternal fate. Consider the practice of blood eagle, reserved for the most treacherous enemies and oathbreakers. This wasn't just execution. It was a ritual designed to transform the victim into a living sacrifice to Odin, the god who demanded payment in pain and blood. The victim's ribs would be broken and pulled apart like wings, their lungs removed and spread across their back while they still breathed. But the true horror wasn't the physical agony, it was the spiritual significance. By transforming the victim into an eagle, the symbol of Odin's ravens, the executioner was offering their enemy's soul as tribute to the All-Father. The blood eagle wasn't random cruelty. It was a calculated spiritual assault that ensured the victim's suffering would continue in the afterlife. Norse cosmology held that how you died determined where your spirit would go, and dying as a sacrifice to Odin meant your soul would be trapped in service to a god you might have spent your life opposing. Even more terrifying were the punishments reserved for those who violated sacred oaths. The Norse believed that words had power, that oaths created supernatural bonds that couldn't be broken without cosmic consequences. When someone became an oathbreaker, they didn't just face human justice, they faced divine retribution that could manifest in horrifying ways. Oathbreakers were often subjected to ritualistic punishments that involved the slow, systematic destruction of their identity. Their names would be carved from runestones, their achievements erased from memory, their bloodline cursed for 9 generations. But the physical punishments were equally elaborate. Some were bound and left in sacred groves to be slowly consumed by wild animals, their screams serving as prayers to the gods they had offended. Others were buried alive in bogs, where the acidic water would preserve their bodies as eternal monuments to their shame. The bog burials reveal something particularly disturbing about Norse justice. These weren't quick executions. They were designed to create lasting monuments to dishonor. The victims would be weighed down with stones and branches, ensuring they couldn't escape even in death. Some had their throats cut or were strangled before burial, but others were buried alive, left to slowly suffocate in the dark, cold water while their community watched from above. Archaeological evidence suggests these bog burials were often accompanied by elaborate rituals designed to bind the victim's spirit to the location of their death. Runes would be carved into nearby trees, cursing the victim's bloodline and ensuring their shame would be remembered for generations. The bog would become a sacred site of dishonor, a place where parents would bring their children to teach them the consequences of breaking faith with the community. But perhaps the most psychologically devastating punishment was reserved for warriors who survived battles they should have died in. Norse culture demanded that warriors die alongside their lord if he fell in combat. Surviving such a battle wasn't seen as luck or skill. It was seen as cowardice, a betrayal of the most sacred bonds that held their society together. These survivors faced a punishment called scum, a ritualistic shaming that would systematically destroy everything that defined them as people. They would be stripped of their weapons, their armor, their names, and their kinship ties. Their hair would be cut in patterns that marked them as cowards, their clothing replaced with women's dress To symbolize their unmanliness, they would be forced to live on the edges of society, surviving on scraps and charity, neither man nor woman, neither free nor slave. The genius of Skam was its completeness. It didn't just punish the individual. It created a living example of what happened when someone failed to uphold the values that held Norse society together. These walking reminders of failure served a crucial social function, but their personal suffering was beyond comprehension. Imagine living in a world where every person you encounter knows exactly what you are. A coward? A failure? Someone who chose survival over honor. Children would point and whisper. Women would turn away in disgust. Even dogs would sense your shame and growl as you passed. But the psychological torment went deeper than social rejection. The Norse believed that your actions in life literally shaped your spiritual essence. By surviving when you should have died, these warriors had fundamentally altered their souls, corrupting them in ways that couldn't be undone. They weren't just outcasts. They were spiritual abominations, beings who had violated the natural order of existence itself. The surviving warrior would often develop what we might recognize today as severe psychological trauma. But the Norse interpreted this differently. The nightmares, the inability to sleep, the constant fear, these weren't symptoms of mental illness. They were evidence that the warrior's soul was rejecting its corrupted body, trying to escape the prison of flesh that had betrayed its true nature. Some would attempt to redeem themselves through increasingly desperate acts of valor, seeking death in hopeless battles or impossible quests. But even this path was fraught with spiritual danger. A death sought too eagerly, motivated by shame rather than honor, might not be accepted by the gods. The Valkyries, those choosers of the slain, could see into a warrior's heart. They knew the difference between genuine courage and desperate self-destruction. Others would turn to darker paths, seeking magical solutions to their spiritual corruption. The Norse world was filled with practitioners of satyr, a form of magic that could supposedly alter fate itself. But satyr came with its own costs, often requiring the practitioner to sacrifice their masculine identity, taking on feminine roles that further complicated their already shattered sense of self. The most desperate would seek out volur, the wandering prophetesses who claimed to speak directly with the gods. These ancient women, respected and feared in equal measure, offered glimpses into possible futures and potential paths to redemption. But their prophecies often came in the form of riddles that demanded terrible sacrifices, sometimes requiring the seeker to destroy everything they had left to love. Consider the fate of those captured in battle, particularly warriors taken alive when their honor demanded they fight to the death. Captivity itself was a form of spiritual death, but the Norse had developed elaborate rituals to make this fate even more horrifying. Prisoners weren't simply enslaved, they were systematically broken down and rebuilt as different kinds of beings entirely. The process began with what the Norse called nafnlaus, the stealing of names. A captured warrior's name would be ritually destroyed, carved from memory through elaborate ceremonies that involved the entire community. Without a name, the person ceased to exist in any meaningful sense. They became a non-entity, a walking shadow that could be shaped into whatever their captors desired. Some captives were transformed into what the Norse called draugr while still alive, undead beings that served their master's will without question or complaint. This wasn't metaphorical servitude, but a literal spiritual transformation that left the victim conscious, but completely unable to act according to their own desires. They became living puppets, their souls trapped inside bodies that no longer belonged to them. The Norse understood something we've forgotten in our comfortable modern world, that there are fates worse than death, punishments that can destroy not just the body, but the very essence of what makes us human. These weren't primitive savages delighting in cruelty, but sophisticated architects of consequence who recognized that true justice must address the soul as well as the flesh. In a world where honor was everything and reputation determined your eternal fate, they created punishments that matched the magnitude of betrayal. Perhaps most chilling of all is how these ancient techniques of social destruction mirror the cancel culture and public shaming of our digital age. The methods have evolved, but the fundamental understanding remains the same. Sometimes the cruelest punishment isn't taking someone's life, but taking everything that makes that life worth living.